Today is the final video number 5 of our 5-part series that we've been going through called Master Series. And today we're talking about advanced split testing techniques. This has been incredible. If you haven't watched the other videos, make sure you go watch those. But we've talked about everything from copywriting, market research, media buying. It's been incredible. And today I want to talk about some of the more advanced strategies, more advanced tactics that really, really good marketers understand, which is not just how do you launch great ads, but how do you perfect the testing method? How do you do it scientifically? How do you do it data-driven and not just going off of emotion or what you see in the account, but how do you actually use specific tools that we've been using to really gain confidence when you're making tests? How do you know when to make a test? How long does it run? When do you know that you can be confident the results you're seeing is true and accurate and is likely to continue? And that's what this video is all about. So grab your pens, grab your paper. Let's move into this video. Lean in. This is some very, very advanced tactics that you've probably really never seen anywhere else, unless you're some mathematician or you've got a master's or doctorate in economics. Let's go ahead and dive in, get ready, and enjoy.
Let's go.
Yo, what is up, everyone? Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to week 5.
Today, we're going to be talking about your split tests are lying to you. And I'm going to tell you how to find out if they're lying to you, and I'm going to tell you what to do about it if they are. All right. And specifically, what we mean is we're going to talk about hypothesis testing. We're going to talk about the types of errors in testing. We're going to talk about statistical significance and statistical power, because I can guarantee you this, as I sit here right now in this chair, having run, I started my career at Mech Labs, which, if you don't know, is the split testing capital of the world. And I was an intern there, and I went all the way to the director level in business intelligence. So I have a real significant background in testing. And I will tell you, I probably have run thousands and thousands of split tests. And as I sit here in this chair right now, I will tell you with absolute confidence that 99% of you have been told wrong about testing, about when to start it, about when to end it, about how to know what you think you know in the context of an empirical split test. And that's very, very important to all the other things that we've said so far, which are, we started with episode 1 and we talked about research and avatar development. And then in episode 2, we looked at how to take that research and roll that up into big ideas and productization. And Ashton taught on his concept of moats, which, if you missed it, man, it sucks so bad to be you, because that was a master's level class in productization, in my opinion. So we covered that. And then we talked about the conversion heuristic, which is how we know what we should test. So that was an important concept. And then last week, of course, we gave you all of our proprietary scaling, decentralized structures, how to set up an account, and how to actually run those split tests from your campaigns. And so it's only natural that this week we go ahead and we jump into how to know that you're doing that part of it correctly, when to stop, when you learn what you think you've learned. So let's start talking about today's topic, which is hypothesis testing. So let's jump into this now. The desired outcome from our split tests and conversion marketing, is it increased conversion? Is it to make more money? Is it to lower lead costs? Is it to increase click-through? All of those are good things that we eventually will achieve through split testing. But no, the purpose of a split test is only to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to learn something. And in order to learn something, we generally have to, identify a hypothesis, and we've got to go ahead and start deciding what we think is going to work and why. And that's why we've given you all the things that we've given you up until now, because it gives you the why, so you can start making decisions about what you think will work. Okay. Well, let's talk about this for a minute. Most of you have been told that a test is over when it reaches statistical significance. Statistical significance helps quantify whether a result is likely due to chance or some other factor. So in other words, it tells me whether the results that I'm seeing in my test are as a result of the test itself, or environmental factors, or economics, or seasonality, or sampling bias, or any of a number of other things. I'm going to try to keep this lesson today at like 10th grade level statistics, You'll have to forgive me, and I'm very happy to answer questions after, because I do have a graduate level education in statistics. So I tend to work too hard on this. So I don't want to get into alphas and betas and all that good stuff. I just want to try to keep it high level for you guys. Okay. But anyway, the idea that statistical significance helps quantify whether a result is likely due to our test or some other factor opens up a whole can of worms. Because in reality, statistical significance is only the measure of the probability of a type 1 error. And you can see how that opens up all kinds of, can of worms, because now I got to talk about the different types of errors that you can have in a hypothesis test. And I've got to talk about how we can defeat them. All right. The other thing that you've been told is that you should run a test to a level of confidence of 90 or 95%, right? And a level of confidence is derived from point estimates about production in combination with a Z standard, which is to say the standard error in the test. Okay, it really doesn't have a lot to do with split testing, other than you should test until you're really confident that your results are what they are, right? Level of confidence has to do with whether you could repeat that experiment 100 times and you would get the same or similar results 95 out of 100 times. That would be a 95% level of confidence. Usually you read those in the terms of confidence intervals. So for instance, if I was running a test, then I would say, I can be 95% confident that treatment A will outperform the control by between 14 and 20% relative increase in conversion on average, all else equal. That's what it means to have a 95% level of confidence. All of that is pretty interesting and pretty baked into most split testing platforms. But ultimately, what I want to talk about is knowing when is your test complete, okay? There are a few factors that we need to consider when we're talking about knowing when our test is complete. So let's talk about first how tests begin. I know that when I ask somebody to come up with a hypothesis, usually your hypothesis is going to sound something like, well, my hypothesis is that the treatment that I created will outperform the control because blank. And you're going to have an idea or a reason, and that's your hypothesis. It's important to understand that when we're talking about empirical split testing in a scientific environment, that hypothesis that you've given me is actually hypothesis number 1, okay? Hypothesis 0 is always what we call a null hypothesis, which is to say that it's the hypothesis that is exactly the opposite of what you think. In other words, there's no significant difference between my test variation and the control. That's hypothesis 0, or null hypothesis. An example of that would be headline B will produce no significant increase in conversion when compared to headline A on average, all else equal. If I were to read that to you in the form of a confidence interval, right? Now, it's important because most people never start there, and yet I need you to understand that concept so that I can explain to you the difference in the error types, right? So a null hypothesis always exists, and we're always attempting to disprove the null first and foremost, and then we're attempting to prove hypothesis 1, right? The alternative hypothesis, or hypothesis 1, is that there is a significant difference between specified populations. So for example, headline B will produce a significant increase in conversion when compared with headline A on average, all else equal, which I think is an articulation of hypothesis that you're all very familiar with. This is most probably how you form your hypotheses when you're doing your own testing, right? So if that's where tests begin, where do they end? Tests end when the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis are either proven or disproven satisfactorily without the significant chance of major errors, right? Typically, most of you are probably not running your test long enough. I'm going to tell you that right now. If you were to run them longer, you would find that a greater percentage of them would regress to the mean over time. Yeah, exactly. What it is it's a distribution of averages, which the longer you run it, the amplitude gets smaller and smaller, until it regresses to whatever the average is over time. And usually that average is not a significant improvement over the control, right? That's what we mean when we say regress to the mean. So a long story made short, the test ends when the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis are either proven or disproven without the chance of those major errors, right? So what are the error types that I keep talking about? What could possibly go wrong, right? It's just a split test. Well, what could possibly go wrong is that if you run your split test and you reach what you think is a valid conclusion, and then you go apply it in your business, and you don't see a subsequent uptick in revenue or profitability or throughput in the funnel the way that you should, it's most likely because you didn't learn what you think you learned. You stopped your test too soon, and you either have a result that will not scale or a result that would have regressed to the mean the further you go, and then therefore cannot in perpetuity affect revenue or outcomes. So we want to avoid that, right? There are two types of errors, right? And this is the main thing I need you to take away. And then after this, I'm going to very quickly jump into how you fix it, right? Because I just want you to get a baseline of understanding, and I'm going to tell you how to do it properly, right? So the main types of errors in hypothesis testing occur as a result of failing to reject the false null or failing to accept a true null. Okay, those are convoluted concepts, and I understand we're playing with words on those. So I try to create a couple of examples here that are just plain and simple so you can get it, right? So a type 1 error is to reject a null hypothesis that is actually true. Remember, the null hypothesis is the concept that there's no difference. So an example of that would be, I reject the idea that there's no difference between the control and the variation, because the variation appears to be winning. So if I simplify that down even further, it looks like I think my idea is better, so let's go with it. But in reality, it's not better. So everybody can see how that would be a problem, right? You're basically pushing all your chips onto a poker or onto a square. We're going red, with all of our chips, but it turns out that it's actually black. So we're losing on betting on that, right? A type 2 error is to not reject a null hypothesis that is actually false. This happens less often, but is actually way more damaging, right? In terms of profitability. So that looks like, I accept that there's no difference at all between the control and variation, because neither variation appears to be winning in my split test. When in reality, I think my idea sucks, so let's turn it off. But in reality, it's actually awesome. And if I ran it for long enough, I would see that it's going to win, okay? All right, so let's create an XY axis, okay? Over here, we have conversions. Over here, we have time, all right? And let's go ahead and get a different color pen, all right? And let's say that our baseline conversion is here. We'll call that conversion. So that's the standard conversion rate that we've had. Since, this is the conversion rate that we're bringing with us into the test. So the control conversion rate is converting at that level, all right? Now, if I'm going to have a type 1 error, okay, it's going to look, it's going to look a little bit like this. So as I begin testing, let me get yet another color pen just to sort of make this simple for you. As I begin testing, I'm going to have a standard deviation that's really, really wide because my sample size is really small, right? So you're going to get some whacked out results that are outliers. You're going to get some that are accurate. You're going to get some whacked out outliers on the other side because your data sample is so small. And that's going to look like an amplitude. But the longer we run it, the more that amplitude begins to converge into a trend line, right? So that by the time we're done, we have a new conversion rate that looks like this, okay? The problem is, if we stop that test too soon right here, it looks like we have a winning conversion rate. But in reality, if we were to run that test in perpetuity, we would see that we have a badly losing conversion rate. You see, this right here is a type 1 error. So now let's do another one. Conversions in time, okay? And here's our control conversion rate, okay? And then let's talk about type 2 errors. Same basic thing. We have a huge amplitude. And as we run the test, that amplitude begins to converge into a trend line, right? A type 2 error, the problem is we stop the test right here. And we assume that the test is a loser, right? But in reality, we can see that if we were to run that test until its conclusion, it's actually a vastly improved conversion rate. Good. So now we're ready to talk about eliminating as many errors as possible, because you now understand what the errors are and why they're bad and why we don't want them, okay? So in order to know what we think we know after a test is done, we need to have tested in such a way as to eliminate those errors that I just showed you. So there are two ways to do that. We have to factor in two things: statistical significance, which is the probability of having committed a type 1 error. Most people stop there, and therein lies the problem. There's also a type 2 error that we have to account for. And so we need to factor in statistical power as well. And out of all the things that I say in this training, statistical power will be the thing that most of you have never heard of. If you've never heard any marketer talk about statistical power before, just put power in the chat. I would love to see just a sample size.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone's heard anyone talk about that.
Yep, nobody really has, because most people don't have the foggiest idea what they're talking about when it comes to split testing. It's a complicated subject, right? I just happen to have the benefit of a master's in statistics. So, good for me, I suppose. But that's why we get you right, okay? Now, when we jump to the next screen, well, let me back up for a second. For the sake of most of our experiments in marketing, we are going to focus on trying to eliminate type 1 errors, and we're going to be mindful as possible that type 2 errors could be occurring, and we're going to try to adjust for that as much as possible, right? Why is that? Because adjusting for type or accounting for type 1 and type 2 errors, which is to say statistical significance and statistical power, are actually inversely pulling forces. So they're related to one another in an inverse way. So the more sure that I am that I have statistical significance, generally the less sure I will be that I don't have, or that I also have statistical power. So the more sure I am I don't have a type 1 error, the less sure I am that I could have a type 2 error. And that's the way it works. But when we jump to the next screen, you will see that there's one common element between the two factors that allows us to adjust our tests to make sure reasonably certain that we don't have either type of error. And that's what we want to accomplish, all right? As I look at statistical significance and statistical power, you will see that statistical significance is calculated using sample size and effect size, which is to say, how much difference is there in the conversion rate between the two treatments, right? That's what effect size means. That's how statistical significance is calculated. And statistical power is calculated using sample size, variability among the subjects, which is to do with sampling bias, the difference between the averages of the tests, and the desired level of sureness that you want to have, that you're not going to have a type 2 error. So as you can see, even without understanding the math behind this, which I do not wish to explain to everyone today, and you'll forgive me for not doing that, you can see that the commonality is sample size. So in other words, the way to ensure that your experiments are as valid as they possibly can be is to ensure that you have run them long enough. And you do not have to guess at how long to run them. I can tell you exactly how long to run them. All right. And so that's what we're going to look at now. This will change everything for you. When you get this concept and start employing it in your split tests, when you win a split test, you will know that the outcome of that, when extrapolated to your marketing funnel, will result in more throughput. It will result in more conversion. It will result in more money. You can be sure, because you're statistically guaranteed that that standard deviation is acceptable and significant, right? So this is obviously very, very important. All right. So there's a split test calculator which I will copy and drop in the chat for you guys that will do this, and you can play with it. But what I want to show you really is called G-Power. G-Power is the statistician's tool. It was made by the good folks over at in Germany somewhere, the University of I don't even know, Heinrich Heine University Dusseldorf. All right, I'll drop that link for you here as well. If you want to download G-Power, that's the link to get it. Well, let's look at G-Power. All right. G-Power is the statistics tool, okay? And we're going to use this to determine exactly how long we need to run our split test. All right, exactly how long I need to run our split test, okay? So first things first, when you open it, you get this screen. You really need to just write this down, these next few factors as I explain them to you. So if you have a notebook and a piece of paper, just write this down. If you're not a statistician, you're not going to know what F tests and T tests and X squared tests are and all that crap, and it doesn't matter. It is Mac friendly. They have a Mac friendly version. So just know that we're going to use Z tests, okay? And then for the statistical test type, just know that we're going to use proportions, okay? And proportions in this instance, what we mean by proportions are known conversion rates, okay? So for proportion P1, we're going to put in our sample conversion rate. So for the sake of argument, let's say we have a web page that's converting at 15%. So we would plug in 0.15, all right? Proportion 2 is going to be the rate that we expect to see on the split test. So we expect to see a lift. We'll say that we're going to expect it to convert at 18%. Okay, you do have to make an educated guess here. It really does not matter how bad you are off, because you can always come back and change the number later with the real conversion rate, and it'll tell you how long to run the test. Okay, A is going to be the probability of a type 1 error. So what we're looking for here is level of significance that we'd like to run this test to, 100 minus the level of significance, all right? So if we're going to run to a 95% level of significance, then our probability of error will be 0.05. So 100 minus 95, right? If we're going to run to 90, it'll be 100 minus 10, 0.10, okay? So power then is your beta, which again, I promise not to talk about alpha and beta. Well, this is statistical significance. This is statistical power. I'm going to tell you, and you should write this down, the accepted measurement for type 2 error probability that is good in scientific empirical split tests across the board is 80%. That is the number that you should use if you do not have a reason to use another number. All right, so my statistical significance is 90%, which means my alpha is 0.10, my beta is 0.8. All right, and then if I hit calculate over here, it's going to tell me exactly how many impressions I need to run that test to know for sure that I have a winner, right? So I need in sample group 1, 1,380 impressions. In sample group 2, I need 1,380 impressions. My total sample size, 2,760. And when I reach that sample size, I will know that my test is complete. All right. So let's play with that for a minute, because it's interesting what happens. Let's say that on my control, I have a 15% conversion rate, but on my variation, I get a 25% conversion rate. Can anybody guess? Somebody pop in again into the chat and tell me what you think will happen when I adjust that conversion rate of the treatment to 25%. Less sample size. That's exactly right. So here we go. Let's hit that button. Boom. When the more the difference in conversion rates, the less time I have to run my test in order to know, right? So in this case, I only have to get 144 impressions in each control sample to know that I know that I know that I've learned something with my test, right? And that when I put it into employment in my funnel, it will, without a doubt, 95 times out of 100 result, or 90 times out of 100 in this case, result in more conversion, more money, more throughput, more cash in the bank, okay? That is how we know. Same thing If I go to 20%, the number of impressions is going to jump up, right? Boom. Now we're back to 520. Now look, 0.8 is the static number. We're using that. That's your statistical power. That's the universal goal for statistical power. I saw a percentage. Yeah, that Neil was correct. That's the acceptable power deviation is 0.8. Okay. That's always going to be the number unless you're a statistician and you have a reason to change that number. Just don't. What you can play with, and this is very important. Now, you know, scientific studies and empirical split tests are fun, but how many of you know that we also have a business to run, right? Sometimes we don't want to wait until a test reaches its logical conclusion. If version A is obviously trouncing version B and we have enough of a study. So there are times where I will come in here and I will change my alpha to 0.25 because it looks like a test is going really well, which means that my level of confidence would then only be 75%. But I'm making a business decision because I'm in a hurry. Usually it looks like a client's breathing down my neck and they want results now, and I got to get the conversion rate up. So I got to do, so I'll change my alpha to 25. And when I calculate that, you can see that it brings my number of impressions down. Why? Because I need to be less sure that it will be completely obvious that that treatment would win 75 out of 100 times rather than 95 out of 100. So I'm using that as a buffer for me to be able to make business decisions about split testing. All right. So again, the calculator I dropped for you will do this without you needing to manipulate G power like this. But I like this because I can see all of the factors and manipulate them individually. And that gives me real power in terms of, you know, getting a test link that works for me and also understanding how sure I can be about the result that comes from that test. And so in that way, I don't have to misrepresent the results to clients. I don't have to tell them something will work that doesn't work, make them unhappy, endanger the engagement. And I don't have to waste money running tests longer than I should be running them because I don't understand how testing works. Now I've solved all of those problems, right? So if you're able to take what I've just done and employ this in your business, you should be able to make more money. You should be able to have happier clients. You should be able to run tests to the exact right length and no longer waste any ad spend on a test that should be shut off. All of those questions can be answered in your mind by doing exactly what we've just done. So that's basically all I wanted to show you guys. So not real complicated. And I apologize for the MBA level language, but we just needed to establish a bit of a foundation there to make sure everybody understands what's going on. Okay.
All
right.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. Guys, first off, do you guys see how valuable something like this is in your business? Not even if you work with clients, cool. Now you literally can go to your clients with statistical numbers of confidence on changes, split test results, confidence on their numbers when they're requesting things from you, or when they just need guidance. I think a lot of people just really don't know, like their level of testing is we'll test for a week or we'll test for 2 to 3 days, and then we'll see what the results are. But that's not a correct way to look at split testing, right? If it's your own business or you're a media buyer working for a boss, or maybe you have, people of the board or people that you report to, now you actually have data to back up your decisions of why you made a decision, why you ended a test, or why you think a test should keep going. You're armed with numbers, data to actually fuel your decisions and not just emotions. I think it's super, super powerful. Ali asks if you can go over the split test tool quickly, like high level overview.
Again, the baseline conversion rate is going to be your control conversion rate, right? So in this case, my control conversion rate is 15%. Minimum detectable effect would be if I think I'm going to get a 20% conversion rate, then the minimum detectable effect would be, that's actually not right. Let me back up. So if my conversion rate were to increase by 5% from 15% relative, then it would be detectable in this test, right? So this is the answer to this question is, how sensitive do you want the test to be, right? It is slightly different, but you're still going to get to a sample size. So in this case, if I want the sensitivity, So in other words, if my known conversion rate is 15% and my sensitivity is 10%, if this goes to 15.5%, it will be detectable in my experiment. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? All right, good. So minimum detectable effect, 10%. It'll tell you exactly how long to run your test, right? Down here, you can play with the knobs for statistical power, which will be 80%. Generally, you don't ever need to change that. And your significance level, 5%, I would probably do 10 generally. That's my general preference for business purposes. But if you want it to be super accurate, you could crank that down to 1%. And that will be your probability of a type 1 error, right? That would leave your probability of a type 2 error at 80%. Now you can go to a 95%, but look what it does to the sample size, right? So I just have to run it way more. That's all. So that's a general overview of the calculator. Not very hard to use, very, very simple, right?
This is the real stuff. You want to see what big boys do in the real marketing world. This is how we get to do things like that. When we get to answer with data first decision making, we get to not really lean into much emotion. And it also helps you decrease the amount of mental bandwidth you need to put into making decisions. Right. And that's ultimately what you want to do. You want to get your brain, your bandwidth into a spot where you're making decisions off of data, not so much emotion. So you have the energy to put it into the creativity. Right. And that's ultimately where you want to get to.
If you've enjoyed this training, you're asking the question, how do I get access to more trainings like this, but also even in deeper detail on Meta, Google, YouTube, TikTok, consumer psychology, copywriting, all that and more? Well, then I've got news for you. There is a program I've created called Human X, which is a 17-week program designed to train marketers, media buyers, copywriters into the world of advertising in direct response in a modern day age. I and my team manage over $10 million a month in spend across all these social platforms. And there is a library of insights, trainings, and frameworks that I train my team through every single time I hire someone. But also, for recently, we've opened these trainings, these exact trainings up that I used to train my internal teams to the public, to people like you who are tired of the gimmicky, step-by-step, copy-paste structures because you understand that those things don't work or they don't work every time. And so you would like to access a library that is built for all situations, almost every industry, almost every niche. If you're spending at least $10,000 a month on ads, these trainings are for you. And if you'd like to know how you can get your hands on not just more trainings like this, but trainings in all varieties across direct response advertising, and you want in-depth, then I can train you personally. And so around this video, you can click the link to learn more about this program, Human X, how over 300 students have already gone through it, implementing these very same practices daily for incredible results. If that's you, find the link around this video and learn more about this incredible program and see if it's a right fit for you.